A shipbuilder that didn't exist 5 years ago just announced a $3.2 billion shipyard in Texas. Its stated purpose: mass-producing autonomous warships for the United States Navy. The company is Saronic. According to its own announcement, the facility is meant to expand America's capacity to build uncrewed surface vessels at scale. RETENTION CHECKPOINT 030 resolution Ts. So what does this video actually cover? What Saronic says it's building, why the Navy has been pushing for this kind of capacity for years, what's still unconfirmed about contracts and timelines, and what a shipyard built specifically for uncrewed vessels tells us about where naval shipbuilding is heading. There's a gap between what a company promises at an announcement and what the Navy actually signs off on. That gap is where this story lives. I went through Saronic's own statement and the surrounding defense reporting, and one detail kept standing out. This isn't a retrofit of an old yard. It's a facility built from scratch for a category of ship that barely existed as a program of record a decade ago: the Uncrewed Surface Vessel, or USV. Here's what's actually confirmed. Saronic, an autonomous shipbuilding company, has announced plans to build a shipyard in Texas at a stated cost of $3.2 billion. The company says the facility is dedicated to mass production of autonomous surface vessels, rather than the one-off, small-batch construction that has defined most U.S. Navy shipbuilding for decades. Saronic frames the site as key infrastructure for meeting growing demand for unmanned vessels, both from the Navy and from potential export customers. That framing matters. For most of the post-war era, American warships have been built the way you'd build a handful of custom houses, slowly, expensively, one hull at a time, in yards optimized for complexity rather than volume. A destroyer or a submarine can take years to build and cost billions of dollars per unit. Saronic's pitch is different. It applies assembly line logic to naval construction. Because uncrewed vessels are smaller and don't need to house a crew, the argument goes, they can be built the way cars or aircraft are built, on a production line, at volume, with unit cost coming down as output goes up. This next part is general background, not specific to Saronic, but it matters for context. The Navy has publicly pushed for years to grow its unmanned surface fleet faster than its traditional shipbuilding pipeline allows. Programs like the Overlord Unmanned Surface Vessel Initiative, medium-sized experimental USVs used to prove out long-endurance autonomous operations, have been documented in Navy statements and defense trade press. Navy officials have discussed, in public settings, a future hybrid fleet pairing traditional crewed warships with larger numbers of autonomous and optionally crewed vessels for surveillance, strike support, and logistics roles. Saronic's Texas announcement puts the company directly inside that stated Navy demand. RETENTION CHECKPOINT. 4 o'clock stakes bend. But here's the complication the press release doesn't dwell on. Building a shipyard isn't the same as filling it with signed contracts. A $3.2 billion facility only makes financial sense with sustained order volume behind it, and what's publicly confirmed right now is Navy interest and a stated demand signal, not a guaranteed pipeline of locked-in purchase orders at the scale needed to run a mass production line at full capacity for years. That distinction between a market opportunity and a funded program of record determines whether a shipyard like this thrives or sits half empty. What stands out to me isn't the dollar figure. It's what the figure signals about confidence. A company doesn't sink billions into physical infrastructure unless it believes the demand is real and durable, not just something discussed in budget hearings. Whether that confidence is justified is the question the rest of this video is built around. It's also worth explaining why volume shipbuilding is hard in the first place. The U.S. shipbuilding workforce and its supplier base have shrunk for decades, alongside the industry's shift towards smaller numbers of complex ships. Standing up a real production line with trained welders, electricians, and a steady supply chain for hulls, sensors, and propulsion systems takes years, even with billions of dollars behind it. That's not a knock on Saronic specifically. It's a structural problem for any company trying to scale naval manufacturing inside the current American industrial base, and it's a big reason analysts stay cautious about capacity announcements until production numbers actually show up. RETENTION CHECKPOINT 50% mid-roll hook. Here's the part most coverage skips. This isn't really a story about one shipyard. It's a test case for whether America's defense industrial base can pull off volume manufacturing again after decades of moving the opposite direction toward fewer, pricier ships built by a shrinking pool of legacy contractors. Unpopular take, and I'll say it plainly, the traditional shipbuilding industry's slow, artisanal approach to naval construction, the one that produced extraordinarily capable but extraordinarily expensive ships, is part of why a company like Saronic gets to walk in and stake this kind of claim. If legacy yards had scaled uncrewed vessel production themselves years earlier, there might be less room for a standalone challenger to build a $3 billion factory around it. On the technical side, autonomous surface vessel gets used loosely, so it's worth being precise. These are uncrewed hulls, no sailors aboard, that typically run on a mix of remote human supervision and onboard autonomous navigation, generally for surveillance, escort, or logistics rather than independent combat decisions. The Navy's own public statements on unmanned systems have consistently kept human oversight in the loop for anything involving weapons release, even as autonomy handles routine navigation and sensor tasks. What do you think? Is mass-producing uncrewed warships the obvious next step for naval power, or does packing that much capability into unmanned, remotely supervised platforms carry risks the Navy hasn't fully addressed in public yet? So where does this actually stand today? Confirmed. Saronic has announced the Shipyard, its Texas location, the $3.2 billion figure, and its own description of the facility's purpose. Not yet public, the specific size and terms of any Navy contracts tied to this facility, a firm production timeline for when the yard reaches full output, and how many vessels a year it's actually designed to deliver at scale. A company announcement describes intent and planned capacity. That's not the same as an executed Navy contract, and that gap is worth holding on to as this story develops. One line in Saronic's own framing is easy to miss, the mention of export customers alongside the U.S. Navy. That matters because it suggests the company isn't betting everything on a single buyer. If that pans out, it changes whether a facility this size can sustain itself, even if Navy orders arrive slower than hoped. If you want to check any of this yourself instead of taking my word for it, the primary sources are public. Saronic's own statements, Navy Public Affairs releases on unmanned surface vessel programs, and defense trade outlets that have tracked the broader unmanned surface vessel push for years. We'll point you to specific sources at the end of this video. For now, here's what's real. A purpose-built, multi-billion-dollar factory for uncrewed warships is going up in Texas. The Navy has spent years signaling it wants exactly this kind of capacity, and the honest answer to whether it succeeds is that nobody, including Saronic, can confirm that yet. That's not a knock on the announcement. It's just where the story genuinely stands right now. We'll keep tracking this, and if contract details go public, we'll cover them here first.